Hello, everybody, and welcome to day two of FedFest. Hope you're well, wherever you are in the country. I am in Southeast London today. It's sunny, it's not raining, so enjoying that today. So, today for our session, we are chatting about stigma and discrimination around mental health, which is a really important topic for us at National Mind, and I know for lots of you across the Federation as well. We this year published our second big mental health report, and many of you will be familiar with this, but this is our annual report which gives us a temperature check of the state of mental health across England and Wales, what things are improving, where are there challenges, where do we still need to make improvements. We had a focus on stigma and discrimination in this year's report, and what we saw sadly is that things are getting worse. We're seeing a decline in understanding around mental health, we're seeing a decline in attitudes, and that is then resulting in instances of negative behaviours around how people with mental health problems are treated or the experiences they face in society. And this is really important because we know that if we want to make sure that everybody with a mental health problem gets access to good quality, timely care, that won't happen while stigma still exists. We know that that can prevent people from coming forward for help and support. It can impact the experience they have with healthcare professionals. It can also mean that government see mental health as less of a priority if there's stigma that persists in society. So tackling stigma is a bedrock to making sure that all of us, if we're facing challenges with our mental health, can get that access to good quality support. We've got a big panel session today where we'll be exploring this topic in more detail. And I'm really pleased that we've got Matt Johnson, who will be chairing today's session, broadcaster and also Mind ambassador. So welcome, Matt. Really glad to have you with us. Before we kick into the discussion, I wanted to ask if you could just tell us a bit about you, your mental health journey, and what led you to becoming a mental health ambassador.
Thank you very much, and good morning. I first came into contact with Mind because I wanted to raise money for the charity because I suffered a mental health issue, quite a big one, in 2009. I came very close to taking my own life, and I wanted to raise money for an amazing charity, and I run a marathon for Mind. But I became very, very close with Mind when I needed to tell my story on national television in 2013. And my introduction to what Mind offered to me to help me navigate my own truth during that time was the most phenomenal experience I've ever had through collaboration. So through my own experience with suffering with mental health issues, I've been able to understand and know the work and the amazing work that Mind does. And that was 12 years ago. So I've been a long-standing ambassador. I've worked with Mind on numerous campaigns to help destigmatize and to raise awareness in numerous parts of the UK, England and Wales specifically. And it's just it's a wonderful honor to be a part of such an amazing organization and to be in this conversation today to talk about stigma, because I know all too well how difficult it is, specifically from my perspective as a man growing up in the valleys in South Wales, how difficult it was considering all the negative stereotypes attached to mental illness. So I'm very pleased, very honored to be here today. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for just being so open with sharing your story there, and also for the support you've given to Mind over the past years. We're incredibly grateful to have that support and have you as one of our ambassadors. I'll hand over to you then to kick us off and to introduce our panelists. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. And we've got a great panel with us today. And what I want to do is very easy for me to kind of shout out and throw out for these people to introduce themselves. So I'm going to allow Andy first to go first and introduce yourself, please, Andy.
Morning all, I'm Andy Bell. I work at Centre for Mental Health, Friends of Mind. We're an independent charity. We worked with Mind on the big mental health report.
And yes, thank you very much for joining us. And next up we have Chairman Stevie. Hi there.
Sorry about that. That came up. Good morning, everybody. I think most of you probably know me. I've been chairman of Mind for 7 years now. I am a lawyer turned ad exec turned media CEO turned all sorts of things, and I now have a portfolio career that includes fun things like chairing PRS for music. So I get to go to lots of gigs and some tech companies. I have been a charity trustee since the age of 16, so 52 years, and have chaired things like Puppy, Children in Need, BBC, and various other ones. More importantly, as chairman of Mind, it's my payback. My mother lived with very severe bipolar disorder, as to my niece, my great niece. So we have very severe mental illness in the family. As I say, this is my payback, and it's a pleasure to be here. Sorry, it's not in real life.
Lovely to have you, Stevie. Thank you very much. Now, Sue, over to you.
Oh, hi. Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here too. I'm Sue Baker. I've worked on and off at Mind for about 30 years, and I was the first head of media relations in 1995. And I'm going to talk about some parallels to where we were then and some of the drivers of stigma and discrimination. But the biggest chunk of my career was setting up and running Time to Change in England, supporting anti-stigma work across the UK. Then Time to Change Global happened, working in Africa and India. And when Time to Change closed, I work for myself now for global bodies, NGOs, mental health lived experience groups and governments and funders to seek similar outcomes of behaviour change around stigmatised issues. So mostly mental health. In the UK, I'm doing a bit more around other very misunderstood, stigmatised taboos that we don't talk about in society. So I'm very honoured to be here. I've had 3 breakdowns, felt very suicidal in my first one, but you know, Mind was my dream job when I was at college and university. I didn't want to sell fast cars or chocolate bars. When I studied advertising and marketing, I wanted to do something about this grave social injustice. We didn't have a term or a word for it that long ago. I won't tell you how long, but that long ago. But thank you for inviting me.
It's our absolute pleasure. Now, Luke, you just popped in. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Luke Watkin. I'm a lived experience contributor and a voice for Mind. I've had some history going far back as Time to Change, and because stigma is such an essential part of my lived experience and story, tackling that and challenging it and helping change the conversation around it is something very important to me. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you very much for everything you do. Now, Rahima, hi there. Good morning.
Hi everyone, it's a busy party. I'm Rahima and I do the job that Sue did in 1995. So I'm the head of media and PR at Mind. So I look after the team that protects Mind's reputation and the Federation's reputation and promotes our agenda in the media, which I'm sure we'll get onto is becoming increasingly difficult. We also tell the stories of wonderful fundraisers, so people like Matt running the marathon for us, look after relationships with our high profile and celebrity supporters. And crucially for our conversation today, we run a media advisory service working with scriptwriters, producers, researchers to get storytelling about people with mental health problems right. I've worked for Mind on and off since 2018. Before that, I was in international development and a journalist. And I do have lived experience. I struggled with an eating disorder as a young person and have lots of people in my family with severe mental illness. But I guess interestingly for this conversation, I didn't see the mental health movement as relevant to me as a South Asian woman when I joined Mind. And I've been on a journey. So I'm sure we'll talk about that a bit more.
Yes, we will. And thank you very much all for joining us. I'm sure this is going to be an amazing conversation. I'm going to jump straight into it because I know we've got a lot to get through. Now, the first question will be, after years of progress, there's recent research that shows that public attitudes towards mental health is on the decline. It's slipping backwards. Now, Andy, what do you think is driving that?
It's a really complicated question, isn't it? And we really need to understand where it's coming from, and indeed the purpose stigma has, what function it has socially. And I think increasingly we understand that it is a way in which societies create distance from people that are experiencing difficulties in their lives, whatever that stigma is attached to. It creates judgment and it makes people feel less than. I think from what we know, some of the drivers of greater stigma and indeed less knowledge around mental health are similar to those that are driving increasing distress in society, which is really troubling. So certainly reduced social cohesion, greater conflict in society as a whole. We're seeing a more enabling politically and indeed in the media of hatred towards a wide range of groups. Some of that, of course, connects to the fact that resources are scarcer from years of growing wealth inequality, austerity policies, the housing crisis, the stagnant economy. Put simply, there's a fear of the other in a world that feels more dangerous for everyone. I think we have to see that it is connected to racism, to misogyny, to stigma around poverty, ableism. Many people perhaps have relative privilege that doesn't feel much like privilege. I think there are some interesting and difficult questions for us to deal with as mental health charities about the way in which we have made mental illness more visible, and should, and rightly so. But some of that visibility is now leading to reactionary responses, perhaps because it doesn't feel like there are ways of turning around rising levels of distress. And I think also stigma and particularly discrimination come because people have the power to do them. And so perhaps there was a period of time when the attitudes we're seeing didn't go away, but they were just less empowered and emboldened. And unfortunately now we are probably seeing that going the other way. So it feels really urgent, but unless we understand what stigma is doing, then we won't actually be able to turn it around.
Thank you very much, Andy. Now, Sue, you were founding director of Time to Change, and now that has closed. Do you think that is a contributing factor to the decline and the increase in stigma at all?
I think I would say it's one of them. I think what I see missing is, Mind is a powerful, very influential voice, and it's a huge movement in its own right. But at Time to Change, it was a massive movement. And it gave individuals strength to be part of a bigger, confident program where we knew that as we built public support, we could also hopefully then work to build political will. And I think there was definitely, we weren't working in a cold environment. There was a slight warm up, but my goodness me, we had an uphill battle. Now, I think the challenge here is, I don't think there is as much political will, and Mind and you guys in the Federation know more about that than anything. And it's a very sort of febrile environment, as Andy said. There are many factors driving, the perhaps need and the desire to distance people. And we know that attitudes historically to mental health do take a downturn in economically tight times. So that's definitely one of the factors. And it's terrible, isn't it? Because it becomes then a blame game. So yes, we raised too much profile. People are swinging the lead and getting benefits. And this is all driven politically, because rather than look at the root causes and do something about that, it's easy to blame the individuals and mental health problems. That's not surprising that this is happening, but we have to have a joined up strategy, in my opinion, to push back on this blame game. And rather than blame the individuals of, misusing the system, or we've done too much to challenge stigma. I mean, how ridiculous. You wouldn't say that about cancer, would you? I mean, no one wants a diagnosis of a mental health problem unless they're struggling. What we need is the proper investment and services, and also for people to not end up in crisis, and the media to not cover these incidences as if they're, automatically going to happen if somebody's not getting the help that they need. And underlying that are elements of racism and some other horrific forms of discrimination. So I think what I see here, and I'm out of UK mental health, not entirely, but I just see we need a strong, unified force together. because that's what helped us find our voices and push back. And yes, some of those opinions are now allowed to be expressed. I don't think the vast majority of people are necessarily feeling that level of discrimination, but those that are very vocal do obviously give airtime to people that have got those views. We're never going to convince everybody, but it's now a permissible opinion to have, and we've got to challenge that.
Thank you so much. Now, Stevie, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that social division. What are your thoughts on that politically?
I'll come off mute. Well, I think Andy, if I bring what Andy and Sue have just said together, you know, I think that we fundamentally believe, don't we, that every day needs to be a time to talk or a time to change day. And this incessant, daily, hourly news and media agenda, frankly, has the most impact and the one that we need to deal with. We've got this constant drip feed of negative attitudes, looking for a boogeyman, if you like. We're looking for somebody to blame for inequalities, and we are scared. As Sue said, you know, the campaign is not done, and we cannot be complacent. If you look at the one fact that really got me from the big mental health report, which, by the way, I think is, you know, a fantastic way for Mind to show our expertise and give one version of the truth and one version of the facts, so that we can lead the sector and do more than just assertion. But the one fact that really got me was that backslide on people with schizophrenia are a danger to others, rising by nearly 25%. So 26.7 to 31.9 on the screen. That's a nearly 25% increase in a year. I mean, that is massive. And I think we need to all grow our understanding of the need for impact of the messages that we're trying to get across. And here is, you know, 20 years of advertising coming through. But, you know, we have to make an impact before we can be relevant. And we need people to understand, which means that we need to get some of these facts across rather than just assertion. But you need to be seen before you get heard. And I think all credit to Sue and the teams that followed. We did a fantastic job with the impact and some of the creative work of Time to Change. And, you know, I agree. I think it's a tragedy that we're no longer fighting the fight on that.
Thank you so much. Now, Rahima, media, television, narratives, this is your wheelhouse. How important is the role of the media whilst providing the correct information to the masses?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. And Sue talked about those kind of loud voices and the impact that they're having. And there are huge parallels, again, coming back to the other types of discrimination that Andy was talking about with the narrative around immigration and race. So we've got this really strange thing going on, right, where if 1 in 4 people experiences a mental health problem in every year, then each of us has somebody in our families, in our friendship groups, in our children's classrooms who's going through this. And at the same time, we've got a narrative about overdiagnosis taking hold. And it just doesn't make any sense. But it feels quite similar to me to what goes on around race and immigration. So you have people who will be very anti-immigration and sometimes racist, but people in their own families who they know who are from racialized communities, they're okay. Or the person who runs their local corner shop, they're okay. And there was actually some research that came out over the weekend that shows people don't think immigration is a problem in their own communities. It's a problem out there. And it's the same thing happening with mental health. And the media has a huge role to play in how that narrative is taking hold and how it platforms those loud voices. I think what Stevie was saying is right about facts. So, you know, my job, my team's job is to correct the facts and to call it out when things are wrong, you know, and to highlight what is driving poor mental health, which is often missed from the conversation and embed stigma. So when we see, for example, violent incidents involving somebody with a mental health problem, there may not be the background about the service failings or the things that have driven that person to that point that are part of the bigger picture. But I think as well as facts, what's really important is kind of what goes on for people in their hearts and minds and emotionally, and to connect with stories on a real individual level. And actually in my work, what I've seen is that when people see a story in a film or a soap, and it's you know, someone who is from a different background to them and has a diagnosis that they may never have experienced, but that story moves them and they connect with it, that is how we shift people's views. And that's what lays the ground for them when there are those big kind of news moments and politicians are weighing in, that people are like, wait a minute, I saw Phil Mitchell on EastEnders and I felt differently about white working class men with depression than the way that this politician is talking about it. There's a brilliant film out at the moment called I Swear that's bringing up a really interesting conversation about Tourette's and people from marginalised backgrounds. So I think it's about different types of stories that we tell. Facts are really important, news is really important, but we also need to think about those emotional stories that people find connection with. They see themselves in it, or they change their perception of something because of seeing it on screen. Oh, you're on mute, Matt.
Hi there. Sorry about that. Luke, now you are somebody that's been very open about your mental health and will continue to do so. How does it feel for you to see the narrative slightly shift, going against what your beliefs and what you have been talking about so openly?
I think for me, it's quite disheartening to see that shift start to occur. It feels kind of, it doesn't want to say that it's a step back, but it feels quite disheartening to see that slide backwards. But I think really what this does is it highlights how important campaigns like Time to Change was, how actually this, as a social movement, it challenged a lot of attitudes, and it was both an educational aspect as well as improving this like social element, which really brought people to the forefront. It allowed like a platform experience to communicate openly, to add a human face to mental illness, which sometimes just doesn't appear there. And I believe really that it shows that those sorts of campaigns sort of need to make a reappearance, that educational element to show people that there isn't really something to worry about. There aren't these negative stereotypes are stereotypes only. And we are just people at the end of the day.
Thank you, Luke. Very interesting you brought that back up about bringing back campaigns, because they seem to have worked. Now, Sue, do awareness campaigns like Time to Talk and Time to Change, do they go far enough?
That's a good question. I mean, we always said it was the work of a generation at least, and we had 15 years. And the job, like Stevie said earlier, I mean, the job is not done. We never thought it was done. We had plans for a fourth phase. We wanted to look at severe and enduring and least understood mental health issues. We wanted to look at people in the most difficult economic circumstances and people from communities who are so often excluded and discriminated against. So there were really good, hard proposals about getting to the areas where there'd been less change. But then, that happened. All the funding stopped for everything. And that work, I know Mind and others still continue to do that work, but it's the level of profile and the level of focus and the level of togetherness which gave us the power. It wasn't just one organisation and one voice in one part of the country. So, but I would just challenge that word, which I have a pet hate for, of awareness. There's nothing wrong with mental health awareness campaigns, but sticking a poster on a wall is not it. It has to be research and insight-led behaviour change, if that's what you're seeking, is changing behaviour. It's not knowing that mental health is a thing. So yes, we had to go on that journey in the early days because it was so invisible. Matt, you talked about that in the valleys. It was so stigmatized and invisible. So it was part of the journey, but only the early part. It was about behaviour change, and it was about a very specific call to action. And part of that journey was about talking, but then it was about the male focus campaign, and it was about taking action in workplaces, in schools, in communities, in all settings. So I would say it was a you know, it was a classic. We have behavior change models that we looked at all the time and very robust academic data of impact. And the thing that I'm most proud of, it's one of the most evidence, if not the most evidence, anti-stigma, anti-discrimination campaign in the world. So that I get the joy of being able to, you know, help local partners around the world adapt that to their context and cultures, which are totally different. But there are some core evidence-based methods that have been applied to our country and some others too. And the discrimination data showed a 15% drop in average levels of discrimination for people with severe and enduring mental health problems who at the time had recently used secondary mental health services. So it wasn't all about knowledge and attitudes. It was hard data on 19 areas of life and whether there was more or less or the same level of discrimination. Very few other people could evidence that. And the other thing to mention is awareness is all great. We've got to keep mental health at the top of the radar. But at the moment, it feels like, you know, we're an open target. And awareness, what does that actually mean when someone else is constantly pulling down? We're talking too much about it. There's too much being diagnosed, when actually, you know, I think we need to talk differently about campaigns. It's not awareness. I think people know mental health is a thing, but they are very ill-informed quite often. We've got a lot more work to do to overcome some of the myths, misunderstandings, and those are being peddled by people that want to play the blame game. They're peddling these myths. I saw a really good comment from somebody that was on FedFest yesterday saying there's a really good session about violence and dangerousness and mental health. And do you know what? I remember we had to do exactly the same work in the mid-90s when the whole media, obviously much more extreme then, it was all about the pendulum had swung far too far in favour of the rights of the mentally ill and against the protection of the public. And care in the community was a horrible experiment gone horribly wrong. And I'm worried that this will start to fuel even more polarisation. And that dangerousness violence issue is getting more coverage and people are picking up on it, rather than think, well, perhaps there's a failure of the provision of services or stigma is stopping people getting help and we're swinging back. So I think we've got to be very mindful. We're talking about behaviour change, and one of those journeys might be awareness and education, but what you really want is less discrimination.
Thank you so much for that. That's a good rant. I really enjoyed it. Now, Andy, I can see your head bobbing up and down there. What are your thoughts on this? Now, we've normalised talking about mental health, but have we really truly normalised mental illness at all?
It's a really interesting question, and it was great to hear from Sue's reflections. I think it's also that notion of normalisation is a really interesting one, because making something that notion it's okay not to be okay is clearly right in some ways, but it's not okay to just ignore people not being okay, or to make it such a normal thing of life that you actually fail to offer support and see it as being a real thing people need help with. So it's an interesting question, but I think what we can see is some kind of pluses and minuses. So we're definitely more aware of the ways in which we as individuals can look after our mental health. We often hear about things like 5 ways to well-being, which are all things we can do individually. That's fine as far as it goes, but we don't really have that understanding of the systemic factors around us that affect our mental health and well-being. And in reality, there's only so much as individuals we can do for ourselves. It's all about, again, putting the blame on the individual. Do the 5 ways to well-being, you'll be fine. Well, you won't. We hear many more varied and truthful stories about mental illness now. You've brought your own, and colleagues at Mind and across the mental health charity sector, we've all worked so hard to bring a wide range of truthful stories to life, particularly in popular culture. But there are still stereotypes, and they're harmful, painful, cruel stereotypes that haven't really gone away. I think we've got now much more use of language around mental health. We talk about depression, we talk about anxiety, we talk about neurodivergence too, and the links there. And yet we increasingly see that the common mental health problems are being belittled as being mild or moderate or low level. Depression is a really serious illness. It is not a mild problem. It's common, it affects a lot of people. But it's also really serious. And then we know that some mental illnesses, particularly as we've already heard, schizophrenia, was still just as feared as ever. and the words we use aren't necessarily helpful. The language around mental illness and the diagnostic categories used are also used in everyday ways, which perhaps lead to unhelpful misunderstandings. And I think the reality is some of the benefits haven't been distributed as well as they should. We've seen huge strides in terms of younger age groups being more literate about their mental health. I don't think those have extended to older age groups. We know that, on the other hand, that young people talking about their mental health are very easily dismissed and not believed if they're talking about things that they're struggling with. And we know there are double stigmas around, for example, people who are self-managing their mental health through the misuse of alcohol. We know there is a double stigma around poverty and mental illness and many other areas too. So we have made progress. We need to really kind of build on the progress we've made. But I think we can see that there's still some really big gaps in there.
And Luke, you mentioned earlier bringing back stigma cancelling campaigns. What does a new, fresh look at a campaign look like for you? What could be done there?
An idea which I've always enjoyed the idea of is being able to have a campaign which doesn't just reach a person, but goes back to the family. An idea has always been of, if you were to speak to a student about something and they have an idea about mental illness and they go home, they speak to their family about it, and the idea is sort of shot down, they're more likely to go with the ideas of their family. So being able to have a campaign which can reach the home and give a family the ability and knowledge to support, not necessarily have the answers, but just be a supportive presence, which can help and assist with things, I think that's a very powerful campaign, which I think has real space to cut through and make a real difference.
It's a lovely idea. Now, Stevie, I really want to know your thoughts, because this is based on facts and information, right? This is serious stuff. Now, let's go back to that report. How important is it to kind of stick to those important bits of information?
Yeah, come back to the point that was made earlier on empty awareness. You have to have awareness as the base point, but then you have to fill it. And filling it with fact rather than assertion is what, how fortunate are we to have the Dangor family support us for the big mental health report for 8 years to enable us to be seen as the experts on the facts behind some of the assertions. And I think, to come away from the facts slightly on, if you look at how well Time to Talk campaigns did through the years, for instance, with a hat from the other side, I was on the boards of both Pladis and the Co-op Group, who together cover 100,000 colleagues. And even if you just look at, and they were partners in Time to Talk, if you look at the effect that those campaigns had on the colleague base, not just on the financial contribution that both of those organisations had, it was extraordinary. And if you look at the effect of stigma change, it's not a fact, it's an anecdote, but last month I went to a school reunion, 1975 to 2025, when people found out that I was the chairman of Mind, and I started to talk about the reasons why, and I started to talk about my mother and how difficult it was to be a carer. Suddenly disclosure was absolute. One of the girls started to talk about self-harming and anorexia. Another one talked about the brother that she lived with schizophrenia and how she was coming to school without having slept for 4 nights. There were numerous stories that not one single one of us had spoken to a teacher, had spoken to an adult, had shared with our classmates, nothing. And we'll come on to that. But the background stigma goes into self-stigma. We don't disclose, we don't talk about it. It becomes a very lonely place. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that it gets worse and worse. So I come back to the single issue in the big mental health report this year that scared the life out of me was that backslide on stigma, because I think we need to act fast and effectively to reverse that change.
Stevie, could you elaborate more on self-stigma, please? I think that's a really interesting topic.
Yes, I think self-stigma and stigma go hand in hand, and one leads to the other. Again, an example of one. A lot of people are more comfortable in disclosing when they're not in crisis. When they're in crisis. Let me give an example of one. I had very severe depression with the menopause, and I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to pretend it wasn't there. I didn't want to lose control. I didn't want people to feel that they had to manage around me. And I think people need to feel safe at home, at work, in society, that if they disclose, people will treat them accordingly, and we will still have a degree of control. So from my perspective, I was CEO of a public company when that happened. What I didn't want is for people to say to me, oh, we're not going to put Stevie in charge of that acquisition, or we're not going to do this, or whatever it was. I want to be in control of that. I want to decide whether something is too stressful for me to cope with. And I'm sure it comes from a good place, but I don't want people to be managing that. And the issue with disclosure is once you've disclosed, you can't bring it back. So I think the whole issue of disclosure is that you need to feel safe to do it. And I'm not sure that we have either a society or community, or especially workplace culture, where it can feel safe.
And Luke, how has stigma shown up in your life, and what impact has that had on you?
For me, stigma has shown up in largely two separate ways. When I was younger and symptoms were first starting to appear, I tried talking to a teacher, and the conversation went quite poorly, and I was kind of pushed back on. I was told not to really talk about it, and it's not something to really bring up with people, which kind of led me to the next bit of, I kind of turned in on myself. I focused a lot. I then became very bad with self-stigma. I became convinced with the idea that my illness was more weakness than anything else. It was an idea that something was wrong with me and that I alone could fix it. I do feel that, like, self-stigma, as Stevie was saying, can be it's such a toxic thing to hold on to, but it can really sort of suppress your ability to reach out and have those important conversations which can change things. And I think self-stigma is an important thing to highlight, because it can be it's such a lonely experience to experience self-stigma.
And Sue, how does stigma shape people's opportunities, relationships, and access to services, for example?
Yes, I think it's still the fact that even 30 years later, after being, campaigning and advocating in this field, is that people still poo-poo stigma as, I remember the first bit of stigma work I did at Mind, because I knew this was a major issue that no one was talking about. I called it Not Just Sticks and Stones, and it was a survey amongst the Mind network. Gosh, that was in 1995, 96 when I first started Mind. It's not just nasty words, is it? It has real significant major impacts on your life. there was a very big report, global report into the impact of stigma and discrimination and how to address it in the Lancet Commission, that was authored by Professor Graham Thornycroft that did at King's College London, that did all the national evaluations of time to change. He's a global academic expert in this field and a very nice man to work with. But this report, along with Charlene Sunkel, the other author who runs the Global Mental Health Peer Network of people with lived experience who are advocating for change all around the world. It's an incredible organisation. It looked at 20 years of published peer-reviewed journals about stigma and discrimination. So it looked all across the world with published papers and found that mental health stigma and discrimination have toxic effects that exacerbate exclusion and lack of opportunity. So lack of opportunities for education, employment, income opportunities, relationships, community inclusion, the list goes on. And I think most people on the call will know about that. And again, a bit like the first survey we did of Time to Change supporters, over 2/3 in Time to Change and over 80% in this global survey of people with lived experience said that stigma was as bad, if not worse, than the symptoms of the mental health condition they were experiencing. So it's a major, significant problem all around the world, across cultures, but we do know what works to address it. Social contact is the most evidence-based, and that's important. It's not the only approach, but it's the most evidence-based approach in all contexts and cultures around the world. That's where those of us with lived experience are empowered and supported to safely and effectively share that, whether it's community level or national level. So yes, it's a very serious problem. It exacerbates exclusion and denial of opportunity. And globally, we don't use this language in the UK because it's not helpful. I should think it'd probably go down like a lead balloon right now with the current political climate. But the rest of the world, we talk about stigma and discrimination being a major barrier to us realizing and accessing our human rights. You know, that's what it is. It's not nasty words. And there are 4 types of stigma: self-stigma, public stigma, associated stigma, what happens to our families, our communities, you know, the people that work in mental health as well are affected. We've got workforce issues, and also structural stigma, which is actually discrimination that sits in policies and practices and legal frameworks. So it's a very significant issue, and the majority of people around the world and in the UK will say it's just as bad as, if not worse. Like, you can recover from a mental health problem if you're lucky enough to get the right support and you've got family and friends and other people around you. But you're faced with this ongoing sort of label on your back, aren't you? You will be judged if people aren't educated and change their attitudes and behaviours. It's like, you know, you can't get better. You're not competent anymore. And it is absolutely horrific that is still so present in our society today.
Thank you so much. Now, Rahima, it's very much a political issue, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, massively. And I think, sadly, the job I'm doing is probably not that different to the one Sue was doing in 95, with trying to explain to journalists that stigma is not this cerebral thing, or it's not just sticks and stones. It has real life impact for people. And so the story that we were telling from the big mental health report with some of those shocking stats that Stevie was talking about, people do not feel comfortable with people with mental health problems living in their communities, having treatment in the community. We have, you know, gone backwards in so many ways. And one of the reasons for that is because political rhetoric is kind of giving a cover for that, that it is kind of suggesting that it is okay to think that way. It is okay to other people because our politicians are doing it. Our politicians are questioning the real experiences of people with mental health problems. And so if people are already kind of questioning it, it leans into it. It's the political narrative kind of creating this environment in which different groups are being pitted against each other for limited resources, right? And we're seeing this a lot with the debate around welfare and who is deserving of benefits and who isn't. And again, this feeds into this idea, well, it shouldn't be those people and they shouldn't be living in my community. And that is what is, you know, making things really, really difficult right now. And it's a vicious cycle where that is then influencing policy. I think the other thing that kind of happens with that political narrative is people who aren't even engaging in the conversation are driven further into the shadows. So I think rewinding to the question before, a lot of us were kind of saying the awareness job is done. And actually, I would say in some communities, it's not. There are a lot of people who still are not talking about mental health, may not have the knowledge, may use different words. I'm sure from the global context that Sue works in, the language around mental health is completely different depending on who you're talking to, and whether we're getting that language right is what unlocks the conversation or doesn't. But I think in terms of, you know, a campaign that kind of goes against that political tide, there is real appetite from the public and from the journalists that we work with for more positive narratives, for solutions. And I think there's a real opportunity with our stigma agenda because of the thing that others have talked about, which is that social contact is the thing that really changes things. I've been really uplifted to watch the Mamdani campaign, the New York mayoral election, and how people have responded so well to a campaign that is focused on connections between different groups, people overcoming differences and finding common ground to achieve the change they want to. And I think there's a real opportunity here with our stigma work to show, look, there was some great work that Time to Change did with buses where people, you know, would meet and talk. Those are really like moving, interesting moments for people. And that's how we bust stigma. So I think as much as it is, you know, this conversation has been disheartening in many ways and things are going in the wrong direction, there's this huge opportunity to talk publicly and show how social connection can change things and how we're not as different to each other as we might think.
So well said, so well said. And so far, I think we've diagnosed the problem. We've looked at what the issues are. We've highlighted the negative ramifications of negative stigmas attached to mental health and mental illness. Now let's talk about action. What can we actually do moving forward to create a healthier and safer world for us human beings? Now, Andy, this I'm going to put this straight to you. It's a big question. Where do we hit politically? What needs to be changed there?
Wow. I mean, first of all, I think we have to be bold as mental health charities and as activists and members of this movement. We shouldn't accept second best. We got very used to accepting second best. And so I think it's really important. We have high expectations of government, and we don't just take crumbs from the table, whether that's in the division of resources in the NHS, whether that's in the government's level of ambition for people's mental health. And when I say government, I talk about national government in the context that we're working on nationally, but also local government too. And local minds should have high expectations of their local government colleagues in the areas that they're working in. One of the things that we think would really help is having a mental health in all policies approach in government. Costs no money at all. In fact, it's almost free. But it's a simple idea, and it's rather like if you're given 3 wishes, your first wish is for 100 more wishes, isn't it? So I think if we really brought that notion that actually all government policies should have mental health as a consideration. If we put mental health at the heart of government, both locally and nationally, we'd have better decisions made that would help an enormous number of people make better use of public funding, because it would be spent better on better decisions. And I think that would both improve people's health, turn around the rising levels of distress that we're seeing, but also at the same time help to turn around some of the stigma by making those big structural changes that could make a real difference to people.
Thank you very much for that. Now, a very important part of that would be workplace stigma. Now, Stevie, what are your thoughts on that? How can we change the hearts and minds within the workplace?
Thank you, Matt. I actually think that there are some quite simple cultural changes that we can make. I mean, on the one hand, let's just try and be a bit kinder. Let's just understand that, you know, mental well-being at work isn't just the absence of mental illness. And I think sometimes those two issues are conflated. It's not about medicalizing, although, you know, you said earlier, language matters, and it does. But it is about recognizing and being sympathetic and empathetic to the sort of everyday ups and downs that we all go through in the workplace. That's about a a culture of inclusion that is kind. I think on the other hand, let's destigmatize mental illness, recognize it as a disability that may need accommodations to help those who are living with a mental illness make the best contribution they possibly can. They may be quite minor accommodations, but they are absolutely worth it. It's not about altruism. It's about more loyal, more productive, more creative, happier workforce. And I think there is a do as you will be done by. It starts with kindness. It's about recognizing a disability and making accommodations for it that you will get a payback for 10 times over.
Well, it's cost beneficial, isn't it, to have a safe working environment, because you know how much it costs a corporation or a broadcaster or wherever for people to take mental health leave, Stevie. And so prevention would be an investment really into your business.
And it's not just absence, it's presenteeism. Forcing yourself into work when you are not at your best. So it's absenteeism and presenteeism. It's lower productivity. It's lower creativity. It's less loyalty. You're not in a safe space. You go and work somewhere that feels safer, where you have a better sense of belonging, where people are kinder.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel very strongly about that. Now, Rahima, let's talk about the media. Such a huge thing. Social media, it's a vast array of misinformation at the moment. It's a big question. How do we combat that? What actions do we need to take there?
So I'll take it back to one of my earlier answers, and it links to something someone has said in the chat. We cannot expect the government to fix this alone. This is not something that the government can do without hearts and minds changing. And one of the biggest ways we can do that is through our work in the Media Advisory Service, reaching people in their living rooms with really powerful stories that make them think and feel differently about mental health. If you think about the power of some of the big streamers, Netflix, we just worked with Netflix on some promo for a film that they did that really brought to life the social drivers of poor mental health in a way that, it's quite hard if it's just a press comment, because you need that emotional connection. You need characters who live and breathe it. And then you understand, oh, okay, poverty drives poor mental health. Racism drives poor mental health. Cuts to services drive poor mental health. So, the real thing for me is to bring people with lived experience into writing rooms, for people to come to us and ask for our advice on their scripts, because people with lived experience are the experts, right? They can say, this is what this genuinely feels like to go through this in that situation. This is what led up to that. This is what it's like to be in the system. I sat on an EastEnders set once and said, well, yeah, they wouldn't give you that on a mental health ward, and anyone watching it will misunderstand what it's like to be in the system. And those are really powerful tools for this conversation about stigma. So for me, it's really that storytelling piece, particularly through television and film, that is what can start to shift things and push that social contact piece that we've talked about, where people are having those conversations in their living rooms, in their workplaces, in places of worship. So that's a real key, I think, in our media work for unlocking this.
And Sue, going from the media, that can be quite divisive, as we just talked about. How do we unify people? How do we bring people together to create a better society?
Thanks. And I know we're running short of time, but I would say that people, very senior people in mental health and health said many years ago when we started Time to Change, you can't do it. It's never been done. You can't you can't shift society. Stigma is there, and we did it. We didn't get rid of all of it, but we had a major good push, and we did bring big percentages of the population forward. Not everyone was touched by it, and not every type of mental health problem was as well included as we wanted to. So let's not give up hope. It is possible, but you have to be incredibly strategic about it. And it does take a big effort. So it feels like at the moment we're under attack, really. And I personally feel that I think we should say, rather than this blame game, why don't we push back on it? You know, just like you said, Rahima, poverty, discrimination, racism, lack of services. Let's not blame the individual. Let's look at what's going wrong and blame the people that are responsible for that. I mean, it's not about making political points. It's about exposing what's going on here and having a united pushback. I think we need a new movement. We need people behind it. We need organizations behind it. And we need to show that there is a strength of feeling that pushes back. The majority of us are not okay with this debate about too many diagnoses and snowflakes and woke and everything else. Let's push back. Let's be brave enough. And the danger issue, it sounds like that session was great. Well, we need some of those myths to be bust. And that's what we had to do in Time to Change. I think we need to be brave. We need to be united. And I was on a panel with a whole load of very interesting people talking about attitudes to refugees and asylum seekers that was organised by the Refugee Council. And somebody very helpfully said, don't lose hope. The state we're in at the moment, everything is fluid. So it can get better as well as get worse. So don't give up. But I absolutely agree. We need to do something together and we need to do it soon.
Right now indeed. Now, Luke, representation. You've stuck your neck out there and you've been really honest. How important is it for people to stand up and speak about their own experiences to help people feel less alone?
I think it's incredibly important. I think being able to tell your story in a safe and meaningful way is essential to that process of challenging stigma, giving the human face. And in that respect, I'd like to really sort of highlight the Mind Voices team. I think they've done such a remarkable job in giving people like myself such a wonderful platform to discuss their stories in such a safe and caring environment. They've made things feel so personal, and I feel like they've been really uplifting as a team, and I cannot highlight and thank them enough. And I think they're doing a fantastic job in bringing lived experience to the forefront.
Thank you so much, Luke. And guys, we have run out of time. That was the fastest, nearly an hour in my entire life. But one of the most productive and inspirational. There's a lot of hope out there. These conversations are incredibly important. We are so aware clearly how important mental health campaigns are, awareness campaigns are. And Luke, your idea was wonderful. I hope somebody wrote that down. And long may this live. Long may we come together and have representation and use facts and information to give the right influence in the right places, alongside government, alongside teaching, within the media, and within the workplace. This has been a wonderful conversation to be a part of. Thank you to all of our panelists. You've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I've been Matt Johnson, and I believe that is our time done. But please enjoy the rest of the sessions and all the seminars coming forward.
Thanks, everyone. I don't know how to follow that. I just want to say a massive thank you, Matt, to you for hosting the session and for being here, and just echoing the thanks to Stevie, Sue, Luke, Rahima, Andy. You all spoke really authentically and honestly about mental health and challenges that you've individually experienced. I think you touched upon this. We can't solve this as one charity or one sector alone. It's going to require charities like Mind and the Federation. It's going to require businesses. It's going to require media, people like you, Matt, advocating for things to be better. So, leaving this full of hope, like you all touched upon there. Just lastly from me, we've got our final main stage session tomorrow as part of FedFest. So that's going to be hosted by Sarah Hughes, our Chief Exec, and we're discussing AI. And I know people will have various views around AI, but we'll be exploring what are some of the risks and challenges, but also where are the opportunities, where are the reasons to be hopeful, and what could AI mean for the future of mental health support and care. So do tune in for that tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your FedFest, and thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists. And thank you to you for watching. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Diolch yn fawr.
Bye. Oh, well done, Matt.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank
Lovely
you.
to see you again.
Lovely to see you too, my love. And yeah,
Thanks for
so
all you do.
that was very comforting, I think. Nice to kind of tackle the issue and then have practical action answers. So that was good. We need to
Big challenge ahead.
yeah.